Alrighty, welcome back to Subs and Ball. I am Aaron Chow, accompanied by my co-host John Harris, as always. And it is finally time, John, that we today are going to talk hoops. Finally, first time since this for the 2023-2024 NBA season. Because we've been talking football. Obviously, football season's over, and some would say the real NBA season starts now. Yes, they've already gone through half the season, but got to All-Star break, and so now is the home stretch, and it kind of works out for us because of how we're gonna kind of go about today's episode structure-wise, as we're gonna kind of just section off each conference. There's gonna be teams like we're gonna talk about a lot. We're probably not gonna spend much time on lottery teams, and then we'll talk playing contenders or second tier contenders, etc., kind of like that. So anyhow, and I know you've said, especially you've mainly focused on football, did you watch any of All-Star Weekend or care?
I watched a replay of the 3-point contest and the dunk contest. I like the highlight version where it kind of cuts out all the middle stuff. And man, the dunk contest, man, it depresses me because that's like my favorite player ever is Vince Carter because of the dunk contest, and it saddens me every time I see a lame one. And sadly, the culprit this year, Jaylen Brown, his dunks were lame, and I'm a Celtics fan. His dunks were lame.
Wow, I honestly did not watch. I've scrolled through and seen those kind of highlights, through Instagram. But I never really sat and watched the whole thing. Really, it was just Mac McClung. I saw, I think, one or two. Didn't Jaylen Brown jump over Kai, whatever his name is?
Kai Cenat, but Kai Cenat is 5'5", and he's sitting in a chair.
It's like when Donovan Mitchell jumped over Kevin Hart.
Yeah, but wasn't Kevin Hart at least standing? Kai Cenat is sitting in a chair. What? Why? What's the point of him even being there at that point? And then he did one where I think he jumped over, was it Jason Tatum? Anyway, I don't know. It was just kind of lame.
Yeah, seems like 3-point contest has just been the star, and will continue to be the star. And then obviously, I didn't watch any of it. Just being honest, even though Wemby was in the skills challenge, although that that's the one I wish I caught live, but I didn't care enough to register the time in my head. And also I noticed too, and I just generally, and JJ Redick made a good point, his podcast was that the NBA, especially on All-Star Weekend, does not start things on time. Because I remember I wanted just to see the first quarter of the All-Star game Sunday, but I even tuned in late, 8:15, because it said 8 on the app, and it was not close to starting, to say the least.
Yeah.
So that always kind of sucks. And I know with the event it's tough because it's hard to gauge exactly how long they'll be. But nonetheless, we'll see if they make any changes. Although, because apparently the numbers say that this was a really good year numbers-wise, even though it was in Indiana. In Indiana. So anyhow, though, let's get into basically how we feel about some of these teams going into the second half of the season. And like I mentioned, we're going to start at the bottom. Let's start with the Western Conference. So once again, in the basement, here's who I'm putting in lottery tier. Once again, you can feel free to disagree yourself, if maybe on one of these teams as well. So obviously, my Spurs down at the bottom. Portland, Memphis, Houston, Utah. Utah's tough, but I just feel like we all know what Utah's doing. They're baby OKC. But anyway, that's who I have in the lottery area. I mean, and of course, I just want to comment on Spurs. Obviously, I'm a Spurs fan. I know I'm not sure if this is a national thing once again, but just being in San Antonio, it feels like there's about half of the people that kind of expected, and you can say that maybe they just were a little too optimistic or not as informed or realistic. Thought that we would be a play-in team, so they're disappointed by the season. And then there are others.
I mean, I'll be honest. I saw people saying the Spurs were going to be in the playoffs when they drafted Wemby.
Yeah,
that was what the expectation was. And it's okay.
Yeah.
Let's remember why they got Wemby in the first place,
yes.
guys.
And hey, Wemby's been great, but I think you can already see too, Spurs, it's about developing everybody. So there's a little bit of, upset about how Pop's been managing, obviously Wemby's minutes, because he's obviously been on a minutes restriction. And I think he's voiced kind of to that. And then also, just the rest of the team. Like it's like you mentioned, like the rest of the team's still young. Like I see a lot of people trashing Jeremy Sohan because Jeremy can't find the whole point guard thing kind of failed at the beginning of the year, which honestly like I didn't expect that to work. I think once again this is a development year for not just Wembanyama but everybody. Like this whole team's young, so sometimes
just
you got
on the Sohan thing too. I mean, this comparison is about to sound crazy, and I don't mean it to say that he's going to be Giannis Antetokounmpo. But remember when Jason Kidd tried to make Giannis play point guard?
Yeah,
that was when Giannis was like a little kid too. So sometimes when you're young and talented, like coaches just try things. It was an experiment, it didn't work. It didn't really work with Giannis either. So
yeah, you got to.
And that's not to say that he'll be Giannis though.
Yeah, no. But I think that's good. Like you want to see what can he do and what can he do to what level because. We talked about when he came out, he was kind of a little bit of a raw prospect, but he showed some signs of like he can become more polished too. He wasn't a complete raw prospect, and we saw at the end of last year he had a really good end of last year. So yeah, like there's others. I'll stick up for Keldon too, like kind of a bit of a tweener role. So anyway, nonetheless, like we're saying, like it's development year for everybody. Spurs aren't the type of team. Kind of like we're going to see with like some of the other smaller market teams where, they're not going to try to push the fast forward button and try to be like, okay, playoffs moving. We saw that obviously because they brought in nobody and I think they have one of the smallest payrolls in terms of, player caps because really it's only Devin Vassell and Keldon Johnson that are like the main money makers long term. So anyway, any other lottery team that you wanted to go chime in about or in that tier that I put in?
I mean, from the West, that's kind of it. I will say, at least in Utah and Houston's defense, both teams are really good at home. So who knows? I'm not quite counting them out of potential play-in spots, at least from that Warriors spot, because I do feel like both of those teams, just at least the way they're playing at home, I know that the Rockets... they've got a lot of young pieces that are kind of emerging. Fred VanVleet also, like, he's been there. He's done it before. Utah's got some solid pieces. Like, I would probably agree that they're kind of in that category, but I also could see them kind of maybe elevate depending on how they finish in the rest of the season. Because even in Utah's case, like, they've lost 4 straight. So they're 26-30, but they were 26-26. It's just, they've kind of gone on a little bit of a streak. So we'll see if they can clean it up. But no, I think that 5 is probably generally correct.
Yeah, and I want to comment, on really Houston too. Like Houston, they kind of start off hot. I think we're seeing once again like they kind of went in between. I would say like they didn't do with the Spurs. There was hey, we're still rebuilding. We're not going to sign any long term guys for agency or spend a lot of money. Obviously, they brought in Van Fleet, Dylan Brooks, which I think actually have helped their timeline. But I think you're still seeing like some of those young pieces. Sengun's had a good year, but Jalen Green is still a bit of a question mark. His efficiency. We'll have to see if that's something. If he can just start becoming a more efficient scorer, because right now it's maybe feeling like that's one of those things that's kind of holding this team back from its potential. But once again, still a very young team there. And then very very last thing, Memphis. I think this is good for them. Long term, it felt like last year we saw they kind of ran out of gas. So like, okay, it's really just John Morant come playoff time. Like Jaren Jackson's a good defender and such, but not going to carry the load offensively. And Bane, kind of wasn't. They lacked depth last year too, as well. So kind of sucking this year and being in the lottery, I think once again could be a good thing for them. I'm interested to see what the cap situation's like. But regardless. Kind of maybe a good little reset for them is all I want to throw out there long term. So we'll see how that works out, where they exactly end up. Obviously, they too are definitely throwing in the towel. So we'll see if Houston or Utah can make a play-in push, as you mentioned. But
I do want to add on the Grizzlies too that like, who knows? Maybe like this offseason is just one of those ones where you have a terrible season, it maybe lights a fire in a team that, let's be honest, was a little overconfident in previous playoff runs against teams like Steph Curry and the Warriors. Like the Grizzlies were kind of annoying to some people. Now, Dylan Brooks was one of those people, but I mean, we can't ignore that, like, John Morant was definitely a part of that too. And like, just, it was kind of part of the culture almost. And so maybe this is the kind of like kick in the mouth that you need, because losing the playoffs to the Warriors, you can kind of still give excuses. Maybe this is that moment that they need to where, when they all come back, the team is healthy, they're good to go next year. Maybe they add some reinforcements with a high lottery pick too. That could be pretty big for this kind of a team. Who knows? Like, I wouldn't write them off yet. I do think that this team has definitely enough talent to bounce back next year, and I agree with you. I think it could be a really good thing for them.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens, and we'll see how the rest of that jockey's out. But we mentioned playing, so this next section I put like just really playing teams / probably teams that may get a first round upset if obviously they go into the play-in tournament hot. So for the West, obviously mentioned Golden State. That's what I have there. Los Angeles Lakers and the Sacramento Kings, all ironically the California residents there. But yeah, I think really it's interesting. Warriors, I think we're seeing, for me, just lack of. They're one of those teams that kind of they have had some young talent that we talked about, like trying to fast forward that didn't work out with Wiseman. That was supposed to be a great way to kind of ensure the longevity of the Roman Empire for them, and obviously that didn't work out. And now we're seeing, unfortunately, maybe his move to the bench will give it a little bit of revival, but I think we're starting to see the back end of Klay Thompson's career, at least performance-wise. I don't know how long it will be, but interesting that Golden State seems to. We'll see though. They did lose Draymond for a couple of weeks, so maybe there would be one of those teams, like I said, but I just feel like they're still going to be, at best, a first round or second round type team. But any thoughts there?
I mean, yeah, I generally agree with the list. I was tempted to maybe put the Mavericks in there.
Yeah,
but
on that.
I feel like they're on the cusp. But at the same time, Luka's really good. They missed the playoffs last year. You think that they'd bounce back, and also just in general, like the one thing that they're really like the weird part about their team is they're really bad against the West. They're 12-5 against the East, where they're 20-18 against the West. And I was looking at their schedule. The next handful of games, like they play the Suns tomorrow, but then they play the Pacers, Cavs, Raptors, Celtics, 76ers, and then the Pacers again, and then the Heat, and then the Pistons, and then the Bulls. It's like a massive Eastern Conference stretch. Now, some of those Eastern Conference teams are really good, like the Cavs and the Celtics, but then you also have like the Raptors mixed in there. The Bulls mixed in there, the Pistons mixed in there.
Yeah.
So they could continue to like thrive against the East, and they do have like, I think I counted 14 games against the West remaining. But even then, like, you have the Rockets multiple times, you got the Spurs mixed in, they have the Hornets from the Eastern Conference later in the season. So like they play the Pistons twice. So looking at their schedule, their dominance against the East, I think that they probably elevate a little bit over it, but if the rest of their schedule was just like Western Conference games, then I'd probably feel a little less confident in the Mavericks. But yeah, I think Kings, Lakers, Warriors is probably the tier.
Yeah, interesting. Like, I do also want to touch on the Mavs because and we'll see, because they made we'll see how big the impact was. They traded away Grant Williams. Grant Williams,
yeah,
at the deadline, and got PJ Washington, who I would say is at least a better upgrade offensively. I'm not sure defensively, but hey, so.
Well, I mean, even this year, Grant wasn't playing that great of defense.
Yeah,
I'm going to be honest.
And apparently, they some reports out there. Once again, we don't know. We're just two people, but there are apparently some reports that he things were not good with him. Like, he was not well liked, I guess, in the locker room.
Yeah.
Some stuff. I forgot exactly what it was, but there's some friction, to say the least, there. So, we'll see. But yeah, Dallas is in his next tier, and I felt, and maybe you probably will agree with this, where it's like I put these teams as potential. I just put them as wild cards / second tier contenders, because who knows, and it'll make more sense here. So I obviously have Dallas, New Orleans, and Phoenix. We kind of talked Dallas, and we've seen it with Dallas. That's why I put them there with Luka. He had that good stretch, and they ran to the Warriors, and obviously that happened. But then who knows, with him and Kyrie, it could happen. I'm just saying we all know and believe it could happen. Just for Kyrie, big thing is availability, and he's been available for a good part of the season. And obviously too, who knows with Jason Kidd and his we've seen in some playoff moments with the Bucks where he got exposed a bit. we'll see there. The New Orleans, I think for us, all of it's like, okay, will Zion be available and healthy? And he has been for the most part this season, but come playoff time, really just health for in general, because at times they've had CJ be out or Brandon Ingram, and so yeah, well, let's say they could be an interesting wild card team. And who knows if they move up and down the rankings, and then Phoenix, I think kind of the same thing, where it's just their big three have been so in and out, and we're kind of like starting to see them come together. But I think the big question is for them long term is, I think we already alluded to coming into the year, which is like role players, can they step up? And but once again, with that big three, they could easily get hot and make a run as well. So any thoughts or comments there?
I agree with all of them. I mean, for the Suns, even when you just like quick glance across their record, and this is something that we all kind of knew coming into the season, but like when they win, they tend to put up like 125, 130 point type of games. Like they're having to score a lot. And even when they do win some of those games, you look at some of these games against some pretty bad teams, the Trailblazers, the Bulls, some of these kind of teams, like they're squeaking by. These are not, and this is with them scoring a lot of points. This is not them like absolutely dominating. Now they do have some solid wins, but we see a game a couple weeks ago against the Pacers, 133 to 131 point loss. Like they lost by 2, but they gave up 133 points. We know that their defense is the one weak point. We know their depth is also a weak point. And come playoff time, sure, the depth might not be as big a deal because typically teams run smaller rotations, but I do think that they will be affected by it a little bit more because they haven't had depth in the regular season anyway. So your stars who have already been playing tons of minutes and are, have been in and out throughout the whole season, like, the whole stat line of how like few games their big three have actually played together, all that stuff, like, do they really have the chemistry, all that kind of stuff? So I agree with the Suns. Same with the Pelicans. They've kind of always been a wild card team. Like they have a good assortment of players, but is Zion or Brandon Ingram really that guy that puts you over the edge? Because we talk about how important stars are in the playoffs. Can they get you like that round one upset win? And then for the Mavericks, I mean, I literally just talked about their issue against the West. That's a big problem come playoff time. Like, they're 20-18 against their own conference. Once the playoffs roll around, that's who you're playing. You're going to play the Thunder, the Timberwolves, the Clippers, the Nuggets, like these top teams, like because they're the 7th seed right now. Like you're having to look at a pretty tough matchup, and you're also going to be on the road, and it's going to be against teams that have been kind of dominant against you the whole season. So yeah, I agree with the whole list. I would say the team I worry about the most there is definitely the Mavericks, which I know they're obviously the lowest of the 3, but it's pretty tight among all the record, just because it feels like they will only go as far as Luka can possibly take them, and even he could truly dominate, and they still won't win.
Yeah, honestly, and before we continue to the last 2 portions, I feel like it's a blanket statement for the West. It'll be interesting. And you mentioned how close it is with in the standings. Just for me, I think the West may come down to just for me matchups, like literally, like not even like throw the rankings out the window, because we saw it a couple of years ago with the Warriors. They kind of got some favorable matchups, but hey, they took advantage of it, etc. And that's interesting to see. Especially like I said, we'll mention some teams at the top here. Let's go to that last portion, and I have 2 teams kind of with an asterisk that I want to dive into first. But anyway, last is obviously I'm putting the true contenders. It feels like the Blue Bloods per se. And obviously it's going to be right now the 4 teams at the top of the West: the Denver Nuggets, LA Clippers, Oklahoma City Thunder, and the Minnesota Timberwolves. So obviously the asterisk I want to put on is going to, in this group, my main concern is OKC and Minnesota. It's a little bit similar experience and depth for OKC. Okay, we know SGA is a baller. Come playoff time, though, who else? Because Josh Giddey hasn't proved to be the guy that can take the offensive load. Yes, he's a great distributor, but he hasn't shown to be a great scorer himself. Jalen Williams, and they have 2 of them, but I believe is the UC Santa Barbara one, the one that definitely plays more minutes. He's shown that maybe he can be that second guy, but once again, like we haven't seen that. And then as well as Chet, and then after that, like I said, depth too, because still relatively young, inexperienced roster. And Minnesota, of course, it's going to be the big question. They're 2 big men. Obviously Gobert, how his fit will be in the playoffs, because we've seen his in previous history has not gone well, as well as to be Karl Anthony Towns, who has had moments in the playoffs where it's fair to be questioned. So any thoughts specifically on those 2 teams? Sounds like you agree, though.
Yeah, I do agree. I will say the one thing that does interest me this year about Minnesota, maybe compared to a lot of previous Rudy Gobert teams, is Naz Reid. He's been really good this year, and it might be crazy, but who knows? Maybe late down the stretch, we see situations where Rudy Gobert's not even on the floor. We're throwing Naz Reid out there, and with Cat and the other guys, and who knows? Like those are certainly a possibility. But I do agree in general. I feel like for OKC at least, it feels a little early. I think that once we get to the playoffs, who knows? Maybe Shea starts playing some hero ball and he tries to will the team as far as he can. But I do think of any of the teams that would probably be most likely to get upset first round, that's who I would think would be it. Just because they're very young. They're very young. They don't have that playoff experience. And I think that kind of youth and inexperience can be exposed come playoff time, especially like, let's say you get, the Warriors or Lakers make it in as one of those bottom 2 seeds. Those are very experienced teams. You have Chet having to guard Anthony Davis. You've got LeBron James on the court. You got Steph Curry and Draymond and all these kind of guys. Like, they've been there, they've done that, they've won championships. And so that's the only thing that maybe worries me about the Thunder. And then for the Timberwolves, I don't know. I still just don't fully believe in the roster. I do think they're talented, and they still feel somewhat similar to how I felt last year about them, which is I think they can have immense regular season success, but can they actually make it to the Western Conference Finals? I'm not betting on it right now. Like, I truly think that as things stand, I believe that it'd be Clippers Nuggets. That one of those two is going to the NBA Finals from the West. Now, the Timberwolves and Thunder, they could surprise me. But yeah, I made this comparison in the past, I'm pretty sure last year, exactly about the Timberwolves, but they remind me a little bit of the Utah Jazz, or not the Utah Jazz, the Atlanta Hawks, the Utah Jazz too, I guess.
Yeah.
When Gobert was there, Donovan Mitchell, they were the first seed, but even like that Atlanta Hawks team in the East that was the first seed. Now, I do think that Anthony Edwards is a bigger star than anyone the Hawks had, but even, like Donovan Mitchell, he was a star too. It's just, do they actually have the ability to like get it done in the playoffs? And I don't know if I feel that about the Timberwolves yet. Like I said, I could be proven wrong, but I do think that if it's going to happen and the Timberwolves do go all the way, that it's probably going to take Anthony Edwards probably like ascending to the next level of stardom. I think that he would really have to step up big for them, and I think they would have to figure out how to keep Rudy Gobert effective late in games, because like even let's say the Timberwolves in some of these first-round matchups against the Warriors, can Rudy Gobert handle the small ball? They're going to spread you out.
Yeah,
they're going to do it. Can you guard Draymond, who's going to be sitting at the top of the key trying to dime up Steph Curry off of like a screen on the wing? Like, are you willing to sit out there and then all of a sudden you get backdoor and you're not allowed to sit in the paint and just guard the rim? If you're playing the Lakers, Anthony Davis, he can dribble, he can shoot, like he can take you all around the court. Can you win that matchup? I don't know. And so I do have concerns about both those two teams, but for the Clippers and Nuggets, yeah, those feel like the real deal right now for me.
Yeah, the Clippers just got to see them, got to stay healthy. And I think what's also interesting for them too is, at least with Harden and even Westbrook too, like as opposed to different years, it seemed like they have insurance in case something goes wrong. In case one of their core, either Harden, number 2, Kawhi Leonard, or Paul George. Because sometimes even if one of those 3 go down, it feels like now with Harden, at least you can still maybe win a series or 2 or still contend. Because remember you mentioned that one year that they made it pretty far, but unfortunately Kawhi
went down in the second round,
and then it was just Paul George at that point. It was a different team too. Like they had no one else really to lean on, especially offensively. So,
and I would add too, like let's say hypothetically a Westbrook or a Harden or like somebody does go down, you got Norman Powell, Bones Highland is solid, Terrence Mann has proven it in the playoffs in the past. Remember, speaking of that Jazz team with Rudy Gobert, it was on the Jazz, right? It wasn't the Timberwolves. He wasn't there yet. Yeah.
Yeah, Jazz. Yeah, yep. Because
when he dropped that 40-point game,
because they tried to put Gobert on him.
Yeah, exactly. But then even then, you have a lot of experience too. PJ Tucker's been in a lot of playoff runs. Daniel Tice has had some playoff runs with the Celtics. I think they have a good assortment of both depth, backing up their key stars at the wings and the guard spots, and then they have a lot of really experienced veterans at the center and just the big men spots. Because I didn't even mention Mason Plumlee. He's been around the league for a long time. So, yeah, I feel like this Clippers team is interesting, just because they've been viewed as frauds for quite some time because of how hyped up they were, the whole playoff P memes, all these kind of things. But this year could be different, which is strange because when you added Russell Westbrook and James Harden to this team, I remember at the beginning of the year, it was terrible. Like, you remember that? Like, it was so bad. Everybody thought this team was going to be a collapse. And then Westbrook's like, you know what? Put me on the bench. And then Kawhi's healthy, and he's been, taking over throughout the whole season, having a really great year. Like, he's, probably going to be a finalist for the MVP. Like, I don't know. This Clippers team is really interesting.
Yeah, they are.
And then the Nuggets, they don't need any explanation. Come on.
Yeah, the core piece is still there, still balling. Just imagine.
Yeah.
Like, really, like, the only person they lost, Bruce Brown. Well, maybe they'll still be able to overcome that. But
But I mean, even then, they've had some other guys step up. Christian Braun, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. They got people to fill that void.
They still have other pieces. Anyway, that's the West.